I'd like to invite Monet and Lindsay to join us back, and now we'll just open it up for your questions. I anticipate there's a lot of them. So we have all four of our folks up here. First question, who wants to go? No one? Okay, Kelly. And if you could introduce yourself and where you're from, that'd be great.
I'm Kelly Gully. I live in Powder Springs, Georgia, just outside of Atlanta. Work at the Arthur M. Blank Family Foundation. I just want to thank you for your service and your continuing service. That's as important as what you did when you were in the Navy. Navy mom.
Love it. My team, I need to introduce you to my Atlanta team. They do some amazing work.
Oh, yeah. No, I already wrote it down, girlfriend. We'll hook up.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate it.
Anyone else? Yes, Veronica.
Hi, I'm Veronica Lazabal. I am formerly of the Rockefeller Foundation, now of a corporate foundation, which I was curious about hearing, called the BHP Foundation, and then I happen to be president of the American Evaluation Association as well. So I've been thinking about this concept of feedback for many, many years with some people here, some people not here. And I think part of and I loved all of the various different ways that feedback has been incorporated into doing. And I think part of what we've learned through the pandemic is that it is time for change. However, now that we're coming back from the pandemic, my concern is that we don't really give ourselves the time to co-create, the time to think very intentionally about the processes and communicate back and use the feedback and change. I think that we've really spent a lot of time thinking about the design piece, but now how do you now implement in a way that's equally as aware of the feedback, equally as inclusive? And the way that I see it is somebody's got to make those decisions. How do you make those decisions upholding the same values around feedback that you've just spent all this time building or implementing or testing through the pandemic? And anybody can answer that question.
I think Monet's strategy is one that I would say is important. I think looking at long range and short range priorities, right? So we have a lot of corporate folks that when George Floyd was murdered, they decided MVA was the place because they give to veterans that they were going to dump a bunch of money in. It's very reactionary, and they're nowhere to be found now that there's more work to be done. And so I think it's important to have a short and long range strategy. The quick reaction fund is really important. In pockets of money, looking at how can we invest in Ukraine, in the emerging crises that we see, basically a bucket of money there, while you're also looking at your long range strategies, because that takes investment and time and co-creating solutions and actually looking at long-range strategies. You still have that funding to be able to say there's a crisis that I need to that is emerging that I need to address or I need to put money into. And I'm still looking at the long-range plan because that's going to be more important in the long run about how we fix these other emerging threats.
Anyone else?
Something I forgot to mention is we just finished our annual drive. Oops. And so coming out of a 4-day giving campaign, we raised over 1.5 million over what we had done prior years, and we had 1,000 more unique donors. And when we looked at the demographics of our donor base, it was the most diverse it had ever been. And for the last 10 years, our giving team has basically tried so much to increase the breadth, the landscape, and the picture of what our donors look like, and they were never able to do so. And they were doing it through strategic planning within their area and within their team. What our president has noticed is that what we've done as a university in the past year or two has been more impactful in an independent way to our Dolphin Dash campaign than we could have ever anticipated, because it wasn't about a strategic plan for a department, team, or division. It was a university-wide initiative. It may have not been focused on funding, but it was focused on the communities we serve, scholarship, and students. And so I would say people think there's never time because there's so much work to do in our day-to-day task. There's actually not enough time not to intentionally plan around this work. And so if that means as a part of the professional and development goals or an annual report or how you review people at the organization, this time or block or week or strategy needs to be implemented into those outcomes, people make time then. And so I just make sure it's intentional on every level of the organization.
Yep, go ahead, Barry.
Sorry. Hello. My name is Barry. I've been working in global health, social marketing for the last 20 years or so. And I had a question for you, Allison, actually. I've having managed a lot of different organizations around the globe, and often been in the role of this trying to have a co-creative process with my staff to develop some new program idea or to somehow improve our approach. And what I struggle with constantly is this issue of inclusion, but it revolves around extroversion and introversion. I'm constantly struggling with how do you include people who are naturally introverted, staff, and actually people from the community as well, if you want. But how do you? What techniques do you use to make sure, for example, when you showed that meeting you had, to make sure that you were engaging everyone in that group, even though they might not be comfortable speaking in front of a group like that? Thank you.
That's a great question. And actually, I have Feedback Labs to credit for sort of what I've learned here. I think it was like 4 years ago, I was at a summit in a breakout room, and I learned about the Technology of Participation group. It's a group who does facilitation training. And so I ended up taking some of those facilitation training courses and learned a lot, and we're using some of those methods. So quite specifically, it means having a really strong facilitator. It means knowing who the folks are in the room and knowing the dynamics before you get there, or early on in the meeting, sort of sussing that out. And then figuring out different ways. So we've learned over the past year that our staff, some folks do want to talk in a setting like this, and others don't. So we often will have, we'll share something and then give people time to reflect personally, because not everybody talks and it processes out loud, but some people do. So you give everyone time to personally reflect, and then you have a one-on-one conversation, and you say, okay, I'm going to share my idea, you share yours, and then we say to the group, okay, who wants to share an idea from the person that you spoke with? And so it's just a way to have, each of those people who have different learning styles and different sharing styles. And like I said, those are all facilitation methods that have come out of that Technology of Participation group that I've been taking classes with. And then you add Zoom, and it gets a little bit more complicated, so you add breakout rooms. There's been lots of research that shows breakout rooms that have 2, max 3 people are a lot more effective, and people feel heard, rather than a breakout room with 6 people, for example. So things like that to just use different people's styles.
Thanks.
Hi, Ashley Pratt, Mayo Clinic. Thank you all for sharing your expertise, and congratulations, both personally and professionally, on all that y'all have done. My question's for Alana, and I'm going to loop back to what you talked about as far as your donors during your campaign, and congratulations with that. But I recently read an article through Forbes on giving, right, and donors kind of now with technology at their fingertips, right? When you look at the diversity of your donors, did you see more of the students donating through that because of the feedback that you were engaging with them, transparency with your change? Because in Forbes, it stated that the top percentage of donors were actually Millennial and Gen Z during COVID. And so I'd be interested to hearing if you looked at that diversity of donors, if it came more from students because of the engagement that you had.
Yes, so we had different metrics. Some were on individual affinity groups, so whether it was sports teams or affinity groups throughout the university and alum, and those numbers shot up at drastic rates. And then as far as across the board with donors, traditional donors, they gave at higher rates, but our students gave more than they ever gave before, and our students who graduated within the last 10 years, those numbers were off the charts, and it's something we haven't seen in the school history.
Thanks. I wonder if, Eliza, if there's any questions from virtual participants. No? All right. Well, local folks, Rick, if you want to ask a question.
Yeah, I'm Rick Moyers. I'm with Fund for Shared Insight, and this question is for Monet. One of the things you said really struck me, which is the idea of we got this feedback that we need to do these things, but we can't do these things because we don't have people. We don't have people who get paid that we have funding for to do these things. And one of the reasons you have funding for certain things is maybe because you've gone to funders and raised money for those things, but also maybe you're doing certain things because funders are interested in seeing certain things done. And I just wondered if you'd had any success with going back to funders and saying, hey, we heard this thing and we really need to do something different than what we thought we were going to do.
Great question. So we have had success for that within a program or budget that we were already funded for. So for example, if we've committed to do X amount of things, or if we set a metric for a particular program and we've learned just from being out in the field and getting feedback that that's not going to be able to happen, or we need to make a shift in our strategy, then we have been fortunate enough to have funders who understand that, or we just may need more time given whatever social impact. It's a pandemic. We need more time to get this done. Then funders have been understanding. When it comes to making a drastic shift, such as like creating a additional program and we need a staff person right now, not necessarily. Those are things that we have maybe had to tap into some of our general operating funds to make happen right in that moment and figure out on the back end, how do we continue to get this funded so it's not a short-term project, but it is a long-term thing. And we leverage the success that we have and what we know worked in that moment to say this is why we need to keep doing it. And that's what we're doing now to hopefully get the funding that we need. But it's mostly been understanding as far as shifts to a dedicated program we already have running.
I'm wondering if anyone else on the panel has an answer to that.
Oh, I have an answer.
Thought
We had one foundation, the Seattle Foundation, that was absolutely incredible through all of this. They were one of our prior grant funders, and they came back to us quarters after quarter and asked us, what do you need? They unrestricted our grant and said, whatever you need to turn this to, that's what I want you to do. And then they gave us $25,000 of additional unrestricted. That helped basically like to fund our COVID relief in Seattle. We also had really rigid funders. County, we have a major grant from King County in Seattle, and they required that we had our staff member in person, required that we have an office open. They required like things that were not safe, and there were times that there was friction, and I actually said no. We didn't lose our funding, thank goodness, but I have to keep my people safe, and when I went to them to explain, hey, my communities are disproportionately impacted by this pandemic, and me putting more people at risk is not it's not within my values. So I'll do everything that I can to meet the grant requirements, but I'm also not gonna let my people get sick and die. So there was a lot of really tense conversations, and some foundations were really great. Some foundations and grants were awful. And we probably won't work with them again. And I know as a nonprofit, like you're often looking for a funder to keep funding you, but I don't want that money. If you can't see that my community is harmed, deeply, deeply harmed, I can't work with you.
Thanks. I think we have time for one more question from the audience, if there is a last burning question. No. All right. Well,
I have a question.
Okay.
Allison, you brought people in that were, so one, we were accepted into the accelerator program and literally could not do anything with it. And so I'm really grateful. I love your speech. Thank you for this. I will be back. But my question for you is, you brought people to the table that were disenfranchised. And minority communities oftentimes lose trust and walk away and say, absolutely not. So how did you get those folks to come back in? Because that takes buy-in that you're going, one, you're going to do something with that feedback, and two, that they can trust you to come to the table. So how did you like reach disenfranchised folks and bring them back to the table when they've been harmed by a system?
That's a great question. It was honestly through some truly incredible staff who are really great relationship builders, and had one-on-one calls several times to explain, and honestly saying too that we have this commitment to implementing this thing that you created. And some design sprints that happen, they involve stakeholders of all kinds, and so you're there with a funder, This participatory design studio, all of the designers are nonprofit leaders. And actually, it turned out that the folks who were in your position who never even made it on were like so thankful and really happy to participate.
In all fairness, I would have come back and helped.
Yeah, I mean, because they had wanted to succeed and hadn't been able to. And so, so I'll see you April 1st, and we would love to have you back. Sorry
Here
about
for
last
it, but
time.
really.
Awesome. Well, that was a great question to end on. I'd love to just have everyone share some final thoughts. What do you want the group here, the folks here, to take away? And we'll start with you, Monet, and work our way back toward me.
I'll say the real power or the real change comes in feedback and in listening to community and listening to those who are directly impacted, and we can't do that enough, and we can never stop doing that.
I would say the focus is on the listener, not in just the message, but making sure you're communicating clearly to the listener. So really having a 360 lens, especially in this global marketplace, to make sure the listener is able to hear the feedback.
I think I would ask us collectively, what are our darlings in the feedback world? And are we brave enough to kill them?
I'm not going to lie, I started thinking about my darlings when you said that. My final takeaway would be that trust building is the most important thing that you can do when working in communities that have been harmed or marginalized. And to do that, you have to have voice, agency, buy-in, and adoption. Trust takes 4 things. And that trust will take you further than anything that you can do in your work.
Awesome. Can we have a big, big round of applause for our plenary speakers? What an awesome session. Thank you all so much.